and recording. Okay. Again, let's see if I can find who needs to be muted. Again, if everyone could mute themselves, I can bring up a great community leader and partner here in healing and equity and racial education and bridging in Nicole Elefante. I'm going to find her and spotlight with her so that Nicole can tell you about an upcoming series of events that she and her comrades have been planning. And Nicole, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate this moment that you're giving me to let everyone know. My name is Nicole Elefante. I'm from CURE, the Coalition for Understanding Racism Through Education. And we are having our second annual 5 Towns, 1 Book event.
Nicole, I apologize. I have accidentally muted you, which is not my intention.
Okay, that's okay, no worries. We'll be in partnership with the Larchmont Harrison Mamaroneck Rye and New Rochelle Library. We're so honored to be bringing Heather McGee here with her book, The Sum of Us, which is a beautiful book about how racism hurts all of us. That will be happening on March 27th. We're hoping she visits in person if COVID allows. And leading up to that, starting on February 17th, we have 4 other events. So we're just so grateful to have the time to tell you about this. And if you want to learn more, I'll put it in the chat. It's learnwithcure.com/events. We believe that education around systemic and institutional racism is a seed, and we hope it leads to racial healing and to growing equity. So Maria, thank you so much for this opportunity. And if this event is anything like the one yesterday, it's going to be amazing. So enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm definitely looking forward to that event and the series leading up to the big one. It's amazing to have partners like CURE in community here because it will take all of us really. Healing is communal as well as an individual journey. So thank you so much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Thema Bryant. I could read from her bio, which I will try my best to stick to in the interest of time. So Dr. Thema Bryant is the incoming president-elect of the American Psychological Association, which is the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology with more than 120,000 members. Dr. Thema completed her doctorate in clinical psychology at Duke University and her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical Center's Victims of Violence program. Upon graduating, she became the coordinator of the Princeton University SHARE program, which provides intervention and prevention programming to combat sexual assault, sexual harassment, and harassment based on sexual orientation. She is currently a tenured professor of psychology in the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, where I would gladly become a psychology student just to hear Dr. Thema every time I had a class. There, she also directs the Culture and Trauma Research Laboratory. Her clinical and research interests center on interpersonal trauma and the societal trauma of oppression. She is the past president of the Society for the Psychology of Women and a past American Psychological Association representative to the United Nations. Currently, Dr. Thema serves as the elected vice president and racial equity officer for her neighborhood council in Los Angeles. Dr. Thema also served on the American Psychological Association Committee on International Relations and Psychology and the Committee on Women in Psychology. She's been honored by the American Psychological Association for distinguished early career contributions to psychology in the public interest. The Institute of Violence, Abuse, and Trauma honored her with their Media Award for the film Psychology of Human Trafficking in 2016. And the Institute honored her with the Donald Friedley Memorial Award for Excellence in Mentoring in the field of trauma.
Israel was split between Israel and Judah, and so he was the prophet to Israel.
Dr. Thema is one of the foundational scholars on the topic of trauma of racism. And in 2020, she gave an invited keynote address on the topic at the American Psychological Association. In 2020 as well, the International Division of APA honored her for her international contributions to the study of gender and women, and for her work in Africa and the diaspora. Dr. Thema has raised public awareness regarding mental health by extending the reach of psychology beyond the academy and private therapy office through community programming and media engagement, including but not limited to Headline News, National Public Radio, and CNN. Having also earned a Master's of Divinity, Dr. Thema is an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She directs the mental health ministry at First AME Church in South Los Angeles. Dr. Thema utilizes sacred dance and spoken word in therapy, community forums, and faith communities. A member of the Association of Black Psychologists, she incorporates culturally based interventions in her teaching, research, and practice. Dr. Thema is the host of the Homecoming Podcast, a mental health podcast to facilitate your journey home to your authentic self. And a point of personal privilege, I stumbled upon the Homecoming Podcast during a particularly dark and difficult point of my life. And so Dr. Thema, while it's not in your bio officially, I speak for myself, and I would dare to believe I speak for others when I say you are saving lives every day by just being yourself and doing your work. And so thank you so much for being here with us. I put the spotlight now on you, and you have as much time as time will allow to share with us this evening on the topic of racial healing, how we heal.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I am so grateful, and my heart is warmed by that introduction. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on healing. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on healing. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on healing. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. What a beautiful gift that we have chosen to gather tonight to heal. There are so many things that people gather around. People gather around division. People gather to gossip. People gather to partake in those things which are self-destructive. And so for us on today to come as kindred spirits with a common goal of our healing and restoration, what a gift it is for us to create this space. And whenever healing happens, there is holy ground. Whenever we are truth telling, it is sacred ground. This is a righteous gift that we have dared to show up, to wade into the waters of difficult dialogue, knowing that healing is on the other side, that we are willing to be uncomfortable enough to see the truth so that we can get to the clarity of who we are. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am so grateful for you all hosting this conversation on tonight. I am joyful to share with you that I spent summers in Yonkers, New York, with my grandmother, who had 10 children. My mother was the second of 10. And so I am very fond of New York, and just grateful because I know we also have a national audience here on today, and I'm seeing all of your beautiful comments, and I appreciate you. Bless you. And I also have so much grace and compassion for those who mistakenly unmute. I was in a faculty meeting this morning and unmuted. And so there's nothing but love here, nothing but love here. I want to start with a land and labor acknowledgement. And so I am speaking to you from the land that has been cultivated by the Tongva peoples, which many of us today call Los Angeles. And I also want to give a labor acknowledgement recognizing that the speed, the accelerated development of this nation was based on the labor, the exploited labor of many people, largely people of African descent. And so we want to acknowledge whose land we're on and whose labor we have benefited from collectively as a nation. And prior to the advances of science and DNA, I would have just told you that I have a lineage that goes beyond slavery, but I didn't know what that lineage was. And I am joyful. There is a homecoming that I'm experiencing because I did the DNA tests and found with 100% accuracy that my matrilineal line goes to the Mende people of Sierra Leone. And so I bring greetings from them, from us as well. What a gift for us to be present in this space. And so I invite you to take what I like to call sacred pause to actually focus in on your breathing, because many of us go from Zoom to Zoom, from meeting to meeting. You might have your camera off and trying to eat your dinner. You might be folding clothes. We have a lot of things on our plates. And so we just want to take a moment to be still and tap in and see how's your breathing, how's your body, how's your spirit, how's your heart. And the reality is you can feel more than one thing at the same time. And so when we talk about racial healing, you may be anxious and excited. You might be hopeful and skeptical. You could be open in some ways, but then also wondering, what is this going to be? And so that is the human condition and the human gift to be able to feel more than one thing at a time. And so whatever you come with, whether it is curiosity or doubt or a longing for wellness and wholeness, you are welcome here. Every part of you is welcome here. And I want to honor intersectionality as well, that many of us are members of multiple marginalized identities. And so when we talk about, for example, Black Lives Matter, we want to also acknowledge trans Black Lives Matter. When we say stop Asian hate, we're also talking about stop hate against Asian women. We want to name all of the different levels of our identity that show up in these spaces, that we don't have to leave any part of ourselves behind when it comes to healing. And so I'm so grateful to connect with Maria and this focus on healing, because we do want to live well. We do want to live well and from a place of wholeness, authenticity, and clarity. So I am a lover of words. Being a poet, I love words, and I am reminded of the words of Audre Lorde, who Black feminist poet, who said, when we speak, we are afraid, but when we are silent, we are still afraid. So we might as well speak, knowing we were never meant to survive. And so even though it may be uncomfortable to speak the truth about racism, we know that our silence does not save us. And then I am also reminded of the Mexican proverb that says, they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. And that just puts dancing in my spirit, you all. I'm a dancer. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And that also leads me to the words of Lucille Clifton, another poet, who said, come and celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Come and celebrate with me that every day something has tried to break my spirit, break my heart, erase me. Somebody has underestimated me every day, but come and celebrate with me that it failed. It didn't work. It didn't work. It didn't work. And so that is the intention of racism, to dehumanize us, to disconnect us from ourselves and from each other. It is to hoard power, to hoard resources, and to colonize not only lands, but minds. that when my mind is colonized, I actually believe that I am inferior. And if I believe I'm inferior, then I will stay in my place and not run for office. I will stay in my place and not pursue land ownership. I will stay in my place and not stand in my authority and advocate for myself and my children and my community. And so racism is intentional. It is not only individual, it is systemic and structural. And it is important to name that because sometimes, in order to make people comfortable, we'll use the word bias instead of racism, right? Racism makes people uncomfortable. They're only willing to call it racism if it's the Klan, right? Anything short of the KKK, then, well, we don't know. It could be your perception. You could be sensitive. Now, here's the thing about the bias language is that if See, bias is an individual word, right? It is an individual attitude, right? So if it's only a matter of some people are biased against me, then I could just avoid those people, right? If there's a man on my street who has racial bias, I'm just not going to go to his house, right? Like that's an easy solution. So it is important for us to recognize that racism is systemic. It is structural, it is institutional. And that is what all of the outrage has been about these past few years when they have banned us talking about institutional racism, that they would remove grants from you if your topic was about institutional racism. Because as long as we can keep it small and say there's only a couple of bad apples, right? Just a few people who have a little bias, right? Then we don't have work to do. But when you recognize the reason we talk about it so much, because some people say, well, it would go away if you all didn't talk about it so much. The reason we would love not to talk about it. There's a lot of other things I would love to talk about. I like to talk about dance. I like to talk about poetry. I love to talk about hiking. A lot of things I would love to talk about. But racism, it shows up in every area of our lives. So it shows up in the healthcare system, where when we do research with doctors and nurses, we find that they are less likely to take the pain reports of people of color seriously, that they're more likely to believe you're trying to exaggerate to get drugs. So you imagine being on your deathbed, and we have stories like this when people came in with COVID and were sent home, people of color sent home because their symptom report was not taken seriously, right? So it's like I would love to not have to deal with that, but in the medical industry, in the media industry, in the news, if you watch the news, you would think the only children that are kidnapped are white, right? That's why we have a whole special now about Black and missing folks. And a big one, a big erasure is around Indigenous women, right? But it does not get the same media attention. So we have it in that area. In the criminal injustice system, we also have what we like to say racial disparities in sentencing for the same exact crimes or for lesser crimes, people getting these large sentences. In the educational system, if you walk into a classroom and they have all of the images of great minds, great thinkers, great inventors, and all of them are cisgender straight white men. These are the great builders of our nation. So you want to think about the psychological impact of a child of color going through the educational process, being told directly and indirectly, you do not have genius in you. Hmm? And so in every area of our lives, it shows up. It even shows up on these dating apps, right? About who is preferred, who is considered beautiful, who is considered intelligent. And so it bombards us. And that is why we must address it, not just a matter of individual feelings, but we have to look at it in terms of structures, organizations, governance, institutions, so that we can shift on every level. So since racism affects every level, the solution to racism has to be interdisciplinary. And I'm so glad for the person writing that it's global, right? This is not limited to the United States, right? It is a global issue that is both historical and contemporary. So for those who are targets of racism, what I have said is not new. It is just languaging it as a trauma, and also for white allies to understand the potentially traumatizing nature of racism. Because when you understand it as traumatic, you would be less judgmental about how people respond. I hope, right? If I experience someone who is a sexual assault survivor, and I say this as an assault survivor, and thank you for also naming colorism in the comments. So colorism is the belief that the closer you are to looking white, the more attractive, the cleaner, the smarter, the more desirable you are. And this has been documented to show even people getting paid more, getting more opportunities. Growing up, I was aware of it in the Black community, but as an adult, I'm aware of colorism in the Asian community, in the Latino community. It's global, the global bleaching industry of how do I lighten this to be more acceptable, right? So then many of us then experience what's called internalized racism. Internalized racism is when you come to believe the lies you've been told about yourself. Huh? When you hate yourself. And so you don't even want to associate with members of your own community, or you want to be seen as the only one, right? And so we want to be mindful of the shame that some people hold about their own identities. So I want to talk about how it affects the mind and the life of those who are targeted, but I also want to talk about how racism affects those who benefit from it, because you can benefit economically and politically and still have a hole in your soul, right? You can benefit politically and economically and still be torn on the inside. And so we all need some healing. We all need some healing because the impact is devastating on multiple levels. So when you have been targeted by racism, you might feel exhausted, right? Because what happens is there's a lot of emotional labor that people don't get to see. You know, I've talked to men of color who talk about the labor they have to engage in to try to appear safe. And so to smile all the time, to constantly try to put people at ease so they won't be afraid of the large Black man or the large Latino man. And so at every moment, trying to be acceptable, right? This is invisible emotional labor, right? Or being in the context of perpetual microaggressions, right? When people will say to me things like, well, Thema, I really like you. You're not like the other Blacks. Is that right? 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 Or me walking around a mall and having a white man come up and grab a hold of my hair and say, gal, so you can guess where in the nation I was, gal, how long did that take? And I just had to think in a moment of what would have happened if my Black father walked up and grabbed the hair of his white daughter. What would happen to my father in a moment like that, where he feels entitled, right, to access to my body? Yes? So there is an exhaustion that can come from having to explain it, right? When people say, well, I want to understand, but what? So I do this for a living, so I will say it's less exhausting for me because I'm used to having the conversation. But for a lot of people, it can be very draining. It also can be depressing because we work for progress and then you make progress and then you get pushed back, right? And we see this nationally, even right now. I hope it's okay for me to say, but I'm going to talk anyway, the realities of voter suppression. And so when these attacks continue to happen, it can be depressing. And also, people can be angry. And I want you to know it is healthy to be outraged about outrageous things. Let me say it again. It is a healthy response to be outraged about outrageous things. And so when people were protesting, in particular, Black people were protesting, but we had people all over the nation, all demographics coming out and marching. But when people were protesting, There were those who were more angry about the protest than what we were protesting about, which was Black people being killed, right? And as one person said on social media, they were so focused on our anger, they could not see our tears. They were so focused on our anger that they could not see our grief, right? And so when you have been trained to fear us, even our sorrow is scary to you. I want you to take that in. People are grieving, but you have been programmed to believe that they're dangerous. So even when Black mothers are sobbing over their murdered children, that this is unacceptable. So we have grief, we have anger, we also have numbness. Some people, are checked out. So, you ever talk to someone, or it could be you at certain points in your life where you're physically present but emotionally absent, so it has that effect. And I want to say that also some people of color cope with humor. So as therapists, we're trained not to respond to the presentation, but to the content, right? Sometimes people are telling you horrific stories with a big smile on their face, telling horrific stories and they're laughing hysterically, right? Because the humor is used to get through the narrative. And then I want to name for those even who are beneficiaries of racism, when we look at the racial hierarchy, even those who are considered, who see themselves in the history books, or who are considered the most beautiful or the most attractive or the most desirable or the most, there is an impact of what has been termed collective white guilt, right? Guilt by association, of like when people discover, because a lot of times in your school system, unless you had parents who did the teaching, a lot of times in the school system, you didn't learn all of these atrocities, both historical and present. And so when you first hear about them, it can feel like overwhelming to be related to, even if you want to say it wasn't directly in your family, which we could question, but to be connected racially to people who have done these dehumanizing acts, right? So what I would say to that is within every area of privilege, the key is not to get stuck in guilt that you get so overwhelmed that you're inactive, right? It is like, now that I'm aware that this is happening, like I want to be a part of the solution, right? Which is why we are here, right? It's not just to say, the world is terrible, but we want to heal and engage in healing others so that we can transform it, so that we can disrupt it, so that we can dismantle it. Another barrier for those who are beneficiaries, you can say bystanders, beneficiaries, white people, is sometimes in order to acknowledge the realities of racism will mean to have to shift your view of some of the important people in your life. Maybe you grew up hearing grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, favorite teachers make comments that were really racist, right? So for me to believe the comment is not true or that the comment is harmful, then I maybe have to do some soul searching and some reimagining of the idea of perfection I had around people who I loved or admired. And I want to acknowledge that's a hard place to be in. It's very different to talk to strangers and say, like, this is what I feel about gay rights, or this is what I feel about racial justice to strangers. It's another thing to come home. And because a lot of people will say in their family, the polite thing to do is don't talk about politics, don't talk about race, don't talk about sex, right? But these are the spaces where some shifting can happen, but I know it can cost you. So I have had white students in my classes who literally got banned from holiday meals because they said something against some of the elders in their family to speak up for people of color, right? When there was a climate and a culture of denigrating under the guise of humor or speaking it as if it is fact. And so I don't take that lightly. I don't take that lightly, what it means for you to really mobilize to get healed enough and have your values push you to the point where I'm willing to speak truth when it's not popular. See, it's easily with us, right? If you're a white person surrounded by people of color, it's easy to say, I stand with you all. But when we're not in the room, right? When we're not in the room, that's when it gets tight, right? That's when it takes courage. That's when you may face some consequences. And the gift is learning about white people who have done that, right? Who have had the courage and the conviction to say, I am not going to be swallowed up in silence, and I'm not going to be stuck in guilt. I'm going to be willing to face the discomfort of being a truth teller. Mm. And it can be as simple as saying, I disagree. Right? Sometimes we think, oh, well, I don't want to ruin things. I don't want to be rude or disrespectful. It can simply be the sentence, I disagree. Right? That's not true. Or I don't think that's funny. It's not funny. Right? Just let the awkwardness sit there. Let it sit. Let it sit. And so there is important work we can do as we heal together. So there's something called liberation psychology. And liberation psychology comes out of Latin America. And the founder was both a social psychologist and a priest. And so it is holistic. And I want to name that it is so important in our healing that we are holistic, mind, body, and spirit. And so I want to take the rest of my time to take us through some exercises, some practices for our healing, because we talk some about what is the problem, but then how do we heal? How do we heal? And so the first one I want to talk about is somatic healing. So soma means body, and some people have called it embodied healing, recognizing that our stress and trauma don't just affect our thinking, we hold it in our bodies. It affects your nervous system, right? And so if I am living in a state of vigilance and disconnection, then I want to come home to my physical body, yes? And so I'm going to show you a couple of compassion holds that are important when you are, yes, in my grandmother's hands. It's a great resource to check out. Um, I love the chat box. I love how it pops up. So we're in conversation even before we're in conversation, but I love it. Um, so there's something called compassion holds. When you are feeling stressed about racism in the moment, or sometimes after you exit that space, there's something you can do to help regulate your nervous system, right? And actually, even before I go to these somatic exercises, I want to say fundamentally, what liberation psychologists recognize, multicultural feminist psychologists recognize, Black African-centered psychologists recognize, is that justice is therapeutic. And I need to say that from the beginning, because even though we're going to do some breathing and we're going to do some other stuff, ultimately, it's not to just tell people of color to take some deep breaths, right? Right? We would feel a lot better if there was justice, if our communities are safe. That would really remove a lot of stress, right? When I talked to our Asian American students, and they talked about even when they had not been targeted, the surge of harassment, walking around with that anxiety, and then also worry for their elders, right? Worried about are they? Because a lot of elders were being targeted in particular, and so I do want to name that racism is not only historical and contemporary, but it's also vicarious traumatization. And I want to name for a number of our communities, including the Latinx community, that not only are you dealing with the discrimination and stigma around your ethnicity, but also xenophobia, but selective xenophobia, right? So not all, for those who are immigrants, not all immigrants are treated or seen equally, right? Even by our government, that some are seen as an asset, right? There are a number of undocumented people here from Canada that nobody cares about, Nobody is stressed about the undocumented Canadians. And yet there is a lot of tension about undocumented Mexicans being here, right? So when we live with that, when we live in our bodies with the realities of ongoing raids and seeing children from your culture and community put into cages, when we see all of these and yet are supposed to go on like business as usual. So let me say fundamentally, if you work toward justice, you are benefiting people's mental health, right? That when we work for us to be treated in with respect and honoring our human rights, then people will feel well. People will feel well. Now, that's not the only issue, but it exacerbates a lot of other issues. All right. So given that we want justice, right, and let's make that very clear, now we can do some exercises for in the meantime. While we're working for justice, racism is still exhausting. So how do we care for ourselves? So I'm going to angle my camera a little so you can see these compassion holds. And I'm going to ask if you're comfortable, if you can do them with me, if you want camera on or off. But just to see, I'm going to show you 4 different ones and you'll see what feels right in your body. So a common one is the butterfly. And so you just center in with your breath. And kind of the message you're giving yourself is, I'm here, right? I'm not going to abandon myself. I'm not going to erase myself. I'm present. So that is compassion hold 1. Compassion hold 2 is one hand on the heart and one hand on the belly. Just tuning into your breath, paying attention to your inhale and your exhale. Yes, that I can do this. I will be imperfect. None of us are going to be perfect at it, right? Whether you're a part of the marginalized group or not, we're all learning. We're all learning. So giving ourselves grace as we work through it. And as I say that, let me say, when you commit to anti-racism and being a part of the solution, you can't be someone who quits easily, right? So I'll give you by way of example. I'm a straight Black woman, and if I speak about issues with LGBTQ rights, if I get something wrong and someone says, you know, you shouldn't have said this or shouldn't have said it this way, it's not for me to say, well, they didn't appreciate that I tried and forget it, right? I'm out of here. No, it's for me to say thank you, because guess what? People could not correct you, and then you keep going all around being out of order and not even knowing it. So it's a gift when people offer you correction, right? So let's not get defensive. Just we're learning. So the correct response is thank you. I appreciate that, and I will integrate that. I will apply it, right? Okay. So we had the butterfly, we had hand on heart and hand on belly. You can also have hand on heart and hand on your forehead. So it's covering my thoughts and covering my heart, my feelings, and my head. Yes. And then another is hand on the front of the head and the other hand on the back of your head. So you're like holding yourself up, giving yourself support. Yes. Beautiful. Okay, you can shake that out. And then another aspect of our moving, one, I will say you can check out trauma-informed yoga. You can find them online, and it's yoga that is specifically tuned to us healing trauma. Some speak directly about healing trauma of oppression. Some will speak about interpersonal forms of trauma. And then there's also dance. And I told you I love to dance. I love African dance. And so one of the things with dance is, you know, our young people say, well, this is an older one now, but they would talk about dusting yourself off, right? So if we did shoulder, 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 and I want you to think about, as it relates to racism, what is it you want to remove from yourself, right? Whether it is shame, whether it is fear, whether it is powerlessness, whether it is hopelessness, right? What am I not gonna, or the insults, right? People have said some ridiculous things to me, you all. And it's like those words can take root and they can stick with you. And so, I don't want to hold on to that, right? I'm not gonna hold on to it. Yes, yes. And then with African dance, we hold the basket. I'm holding my invisible basket, and then I'm picking fruit and putting it in the basket. And so you think about, to address racism going forward, what do I need? And I'm going to reach up and grab it and put it in. And we do it with a boom, boom, doom, doom, doom. And da, da, and da. Don't get nervous. You can do it. And da, da, and da, da, and ah, ah. And 1, 2, and 1, 2. And think about what you're putting in your basket. I need more courage. Some of us need some more knowledge. Let me go get some books and actually read the books, right? I need a community, right? I don't want to do it by myself. And so I'm going to get what I need. I need humility, because the worst thing you can do is show up for racial healing work with arrogance. Right? That's the worst thing, right? We all want to be teachable. That's what we would say in my church, have a teachable spirit where we're open to new information, right? Because there is so much to learn about each other. And so a part of our healing is also gaining knowledge and wisdom. Sometimes I'll say, especially, well, how do I want to say that? I want to say often we can think about events affecting people of color as their history instead of US history, right? So, US history is often white American history, and then people of color's history is just for them. So we want to have a curiosity and a respect for learning about our own history and the history of all of the different groups that comprise our community. And so knowledge is healing. And then I want to name the importance of the arts. In liberation psychology, they have a term artivism. Actually, that's with Mujerista psychology, the psychology of Latinas or the Latinx community, a combination of art and activism. I love it. Use your poetry to speak about justice. Use your music to sing about justice. Use your dance, use your collage making. And when people get nervous about talking with children about racism, use our art. Our children are already experiencing it. And so we want to give them the tools to be able to language it and to process it and to feel good about themselves, knowing, here's the thing. I want you to get this phrase. Culture is medicine. It is healing for people to learn about their culture, so that even though I know about racism, racism is not the only thing I know about being of African descent, right? If I define myself only through my wounds, then I'm going to be a very wounded person. So I can see my wounds, but I know that's not the full story of what it means to be Black, right? I know that we have like a rich oral tradition, that we have a rich musical tradition. I know that we have a rich political tradition. We have a rich spiritual tradition. And so that is the opposite of being colorblind. Some people had thought the solution was, when people have said to me, Thema, until you said something, I didn't notice you were Black. Well, isn't that ridiculous? Right? And they meant it as a compliment. You're looking at me, right? You're looking at me. And that means you could not see me. And what they mean when they say that is, I didn't think anything bad about it, right? But isn't it something that to see it would be to think something bad, right? So we have long since gotten over this idea that the solution is for us not to see each other, right? Erasure is not the solution. So that's why people say, instead of a melting pot, let's have a chunky soup, right? Where I don't have to assimilate and erase and show up as something I'm not and try to speak like you and dress like you and talk like you, that I could show up with my full flavor and it makes the soup better, right? So culture is medicine, yes? And then the last one I will mention is resistance. Resistance is therapeutic. And Western models of psychology, and I'm a trauma psychologist, Western models of psychology only focus, I don't say only, but only focus on coping and meaning making, right? So if you experience domestic violence, intimate partner violence, community violence, they will say we need to work on your coping strategies, right? So healthy coping is, taking care of yourself, going for a walk, um, eating right. All of these are like healthy coping strategies. In liberation psychology, and in African-centered psychology and womanist psychology, which is the psychology of Black women, we talk about the need for resistance strategies, which is how you fight oppression, right? My aim is not just to empower people to cope. Like, people are going to treat you horribly, and then afterwards you can journal. Well, I mean, journaling is therapeutic, but I need to be able to do more than journal. When it shows up, how do I want to respond? Right? So that's the empowerment model. And so resistance allows us, or you can say advocacy or activism or empowerment models. These are also healing. It allows us to have voice and agency. And I know I said that the resistance one was going to be the last one, but the real last strategy I'll mention is community. And I'm so glad someone mentioned it in the chat. Uh, Racism tries to isolate us and disconnect us. And so it is a radical act for us to connect with each other, for us to gather in this space on tonight of all nights in the midst of a pandemic, desiring connection, community, and not just my individual healing, but for us all to be able to be whole, right? For us all to be on this healing journey and for us to see each other. The Association of Black Psychologists conduct numerous healing circles, and one of their healing circle models is called Sawubona. And Sawubona is a Zulu greeting that says, I see you, right? I see you. And that is so important because with racism, many of us feel invisible. Many of us, and that's why if you've ever visited a Black church, they'll a million times the pastor will say, turn to your neighbor and say this, turn to your neighbor and say that, because it is an act of saying, I see you, I see you, I see you, right? That you may be working in systems where you are the only one or one of few, or you may be in systems where you are underestimated and overlooked. But when we can really see each other and show up for each other, it is healing. And so I want to teach you this little song, and then I'm happy to take your questions. And this is a song that I learned in Botswana, Southern Africa. And it says, we are one family and none can separate us, none can separate us, none can separate us. We are one family and none can separate us, no, never. And it goes like this. And you can sing unmuted because I know that you can stay muted while you sing because the timing will probably throw us all off. We are one family and none can separate us. None can separate us. None can separate us. We are one family and none can separate us. No, no, never. And now we want to do it with sign. So get your hands ready if that is comfortable for you. All right. This is an F in sign language. That's why it's family. We are one family and none can separate us. None can separate us. None can separate us. We are one family and none can separate us. No, no, never. And we clap and sign. Woo! Wonderful. I am so grateful that you all are here, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Second, Dennis.
Dr. Thema, I just want to say, I feel like I've experienced a whole book in just this short period of time. I hope all of this goes into another book, please, because this is right on time. I work with youth, and with all of the anxiety, depression, fear, everything that's going on right now, and street violence, everything you said, I need to be able to go back and reference. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you are welcome. And I'm so grateful. They're going to think I paid you to say that when I say I'm about to say in April, I do have a book coming out on anti-racism. It's the Anti-Racism Handbook, and it's
Okay.
already on Amazon for pre-order. And my co-author is my best friend and my daughter's godmother. Her name is Edith Arrington, and we wrote it together. So it's a workbook, and it'll be out in April. Amira?
Amiri.
Amiri.
So I'm currently a senior in high school, and